So we think about, we think about energy. We think about physical energy that comes from exercising. We think about energy that comes from food. And then there's a source of energy that comes from emotions. And so that's what we're going to be focused on briefly today, is that kind of energy. I was at a workshop where they put this on the wall, which is an ECG of electrocardiogram of the heart when somebody is very angry or frustrated. Okay, it's a really bad rhythm to see, and we'll look at the positive rhythm in a minute. But it's tight, it's harsh, it's really condensed. It's not a good rhythm to see. And one of the things that happens when we're irritated or frustrated with somebody is we start flooding. And flooding is the biofeedback word for anger. So what do we know about flooding? Well, when we flood, when we get angry, we start getting irritated, brain activity shifts from the cortex down to the medulla, which is down here at the base of the skull, about the size of a walnut. So not very much thinking capacity when we start getting angry. Okay? And one of the things that happens is we lose the ability to think clearly and analytically when we're angry. Have you ever done that? Where you've said things that didn't even make sense? Or you don't even believe it, but you just say it because you're flooded. Okay? So one of the things that happens is what we call an increase in emotional idiocy. And what's that? Well, doing things that make no sense. And I clipped this picture out of the newspaper because I thought this was a bunch of baseball fans that got mad at their team because they were moving out of town, and so they threw their bench on the field. And I thought, well, that was really dumb. I thought, where are they going to sit now? And this is usually where I make my confession that I used to be a major flooder. And one time I threw a chair out of a second-story window. I learned how to flood from my dad, who was a Marine in World War II. And I thought that was normal. But then I saw this graph. And all this stuff all the graphs and stuff are in my little book, which if you're going to stay here for a day long, you're going to get a copy of that book at no cost. So I saw this graph which showed the relationship between early death and hostility. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I have got to stop. And so I thank heavens for neuroplasticity. These are neurons. And what we do when we change behaviors is we just get conscious and we short circuit, sending energy down the neurons we don't want to reinforce, and we begin sending neurons or sending energy down the neurons we do want to enforce. That's why we can change at any age. Okay? So we are born, though. One of the things we have to learn to deal with is that what the neurobiologists are saying now is that our brains have a negativity bias, which leaves us all a little bit dissatisfied, a little bit anxious, and a little bit insecure. And I always thought that if we had been taught that when we were little, every kid in this class, boys and girls, feels a little insecure and a little anxious, would we not have been more kind and compassionate to each other and understood each other's behavior more quickly and easily? Okay? That negativity bias was a gift, sort of, for survival when sudden death was a constant threat. So neurobiologists tell us now that negative experiences are 5 times more powerful than positive ones. They stick like Velcro. That makes sense? So imagine you go to your high school reunion, you talk to 20 people, 19 of them say really wonderful things about you, and one of them is snarky. One of them says something kind of, that hurts. Who are you talking about, or what are you talking about on the way home? You're talking about that one comment, right? 5 times more powerful than positive comments, okay? They talk about positive comments as Teflon. They just don't stick because of the negativity bias of the brain. And what that is based on is that when we were in the bush, which is 99% of the time we've been here on the planet, we were hunters and gatherers, we could miss a lot of positive events. We could only miss one negative one threat. And then we were gone. So our body is exquisitely wired to threat. If somebody was out in the hall and started yelling a conversation, all of our attention. When we get driving down the highway, we see a car accident, right? It's the negativity bias of the brain. So we have to compensate for that in our thinking. And one of the best ways that researchers have come up with to date is by a steady practice of gratitude. So 5 minutes in the morning, especially 5 minutes before you fall asleep at night. Because gratitude does the opposite to our bodies. It kind of says, you're surrounded by abundance. Could you just relax a little bit? Okay? But flooding isn't the enemy. The purpose of flooding is speed and strength. Okay? And I clipped this picture out of the paper because these few guys, if there's 3 or 4 guys, had rolled this car over that had hit a pedestrian. That's the purpose of flooding. All that adrenaline, hormones, all that stuff that happens, the amygdala, the purpose of that is to escape the threat. Okay? So, if your life is at risk, I tell my clients, flood. If you're going to rear end that car, you flood. Because one of the things that happens when we flood is the blood thickens. And that's a preventative so we don't bleed out. Okay, that's why it's linked to heart disease, because thick blood is not a good thing. All right? But, so if your life is at risk, you flood. But if we're in the workplace, or we're trying to problem solve, and people start getting irritated, then we're going backwards.